welcome to Golden Blooded, everybody. And if you are a college football fan, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. That is all we do here every single day. And send gear to represent your team and yourself to Golden Blooded. I guarantee you, if you send it to me, I will put it in my background. Send your gear to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina 29657. Fortunately, it's time to talk about the worst teams, and I try to base this on week to week, but some teams are so bad that they are going to make the list week after week after week after week. I'm talking about my bottom 10 for week 4. First, I have some honorable mentions. The first honorable mentions is the Hurricanes of Miami. Let me get this straight. The Miami Hurricanes went from number 5 in my top 25. Now they're borderline on my bottom 10. Yeah, that's how big of a step back they've taken. Now, for Miami, they're 2-2, so they don't have a losing record, but they're not looking good. Their wins include FCS Bethune-Cookman 70-13 and Southern Miss 30-7. But then they go on the road and lose to mighty number 24 Texas A&M 17-9 in spite of dominating that game statistically. It made no sense. Miami just couldn't score a touchdown. That's what it came down to. Think about it. If they could just score a couple of touchdowns, they would have won that game. But then they follow that up by losing to Middle Tennessee at home 45-31. Their stats aren't bad, actually. They're scoring 35 points per game, that's 47th, and allowing 20.5 points per game, which is 46th. But they have fallen off big time. So Miami, you're definitely getting an honorable mention. Turn it around, or you might actually make my bottom 10. Next honorable mention is going to be Stanford. They're 1-2. The problem with Stanford is they've played two really good teams. Now, their only win is against FCS Colgate 41-10. Their two losses against number 10 USC 41-28 and at number 18 Washington 40-22. They're scoring 30.3 points per game, which is 74th. The problem is they're also allowing 30.3 points per game, which is 92nd. You can't do that. You have to score more than you allow. But the good news is I do think Stanford's schedule does have a few more wins on there, so maybe they can stay off my bottom 10 list. My final honorable mention is South Carolina. They're also 2-2, and it's also because of their schedule. Their two wins against Georgia State, 35-14, and then Charlotte, 56-20. Two losses at number 16 Arkansas, 44-30, and then number 1 Georgia, 48-7. Now they're scoring 32 points per game, which is 63rd, and allowing 31.5 points per game, which is 97th. Now that may be a product of the two tough opponents that they have played, but there are some opponents remaining on their schedule that will really prove if they're really that bad or not. All right, let's get to my actual bottom 10. Coming in at number 10, and the farther we go into the list, the worse they are. Number 10 is actually the least worst team on my list, and that's going to be Purdue. They're 2-2 right now. They have wins over FCS Indiana State 56-0 and FAU 28-26. Losses to Penn State 35-31 and at Syracuse 32-29. Now they're scoring 36 points per game, which is 46th. That's not bad, and allowing 23.2 points per game, which is 61st. So they're not a horrible team, but they made my list because they lost to worse teams and have slightly worse stats than Miami. It was between Miami and Purdue. Number 9, this is when we get into some really bad teams. Missouri, they're also 2-2. Their wins include Louisiana Tech 52-24, FCS Abilene Christian 34-17. They lost at Kansas State 40-12 and at Auburn 17-14. Auburn is not a good team. That's a bad loss. Missouri is averaging 28 points per game, which is 87th, allowing 24.5 points per game, which is 67th. That's not good at all, but it's not the worst of the worst, but it is good enough, or should I say bad enough, to make my bottom 10. Number 8 is going to be Virginia Tech. They're also 2-2. The crazy thing is they are first in the ACC Coastal because they're 1-0 in the ACC. Yeah, the first place team, or tied in first place, is on my bottom 10. They do have a win over Boston College 27-10 and a win over FCS Wofford 27-7. Losses include West Virginia at home 33-10, a blowout loss to West Virginia. And at one time, West Virginia was actually on my bottom 10. And also a loss at Old Dominion 2017. Virginia Tech is scoring 20.2 points per game, which is 113th. Terrible offense, allowing 17.5 points per game, which is 27th. That seems good, but look at the teams they've played. The only decent offense that they played is West Virginia, and they got blown out. Number 7 is going to be Arizona. They're also 2-2. Wins include at San Diego State 38-20. At the time, we thought that was a great win. Turns out San Diego State is taking a massive step backwards this year. And also a win over FCS North Dakota State 31-28. I will say against an FCS team, that's probably the best win win you could grab because North Dakota State is usually the best team in the FCS. But their losses include a home loss against Mississippi State 39-17 and at Cal 49-31. They're averaging 29.2 points per game, which is 81st, and allowing 34 points per game, which is 108. They have a bad offense and an even worse defense, and that's why Arizona is number 7 on the worst 10 teams this week. Not good, Arizona. Thought you were turning it around. Number 6. Staying in the state of Arizona, Arizona State, 1-3 to start the season. Their only win is against FCS Northern Arizona, 40-3. But their 3 losses include at number 10, Oklahoma State, 34-17. They were actually competitive in that game. Then Eastern Michigan, 30-21, and then number 13 Utah, 34-13. Herm Edwards was fired because of the Eastern Michigan loss and because Arizona State's being investigated for recruiting violations during the COVID year. Arizona State is averaging 22.8 points per game, 106. That is a terrible offense, and allowing 25.2 points per game, which is 71st. Not a good defense, but a horrific offense. And you can't lose to Eastern Michigan. Combine that with the fact that they're 1-3 and they fired their head coach. That's why Arizona State's number 6 on my worst 10 for week 4. Coming in at number 5, now we're getting into the really bad teams. And you're going to be very familiar with these teams if you watched my previous worst 10 teams. Number 5, Northwestern, 1-3. Their only win was against Nebraska, 31-28. We all know how bad Nebraska is. 3 losses include Miami of Ohio, 17-14, FCS Southern Illinois, 31-24, and Duke, 31-23. They're averaging 23 points per game, which is 104th. That's normal for Northwestern. They don't have good offenses, but they're allowing 26.8 points per game, which is 82nd. That's a problem for Northwestern. If they don't have a great defense, they're going to lose a lot of football games because they never have a good offense. Coming in at number 4, Nebraska, the only win for Northwestern. Nebraska's 1-3. Their only win was against FCS North Dakota, 38-17. Losses include bad Northwestern, 31-28. Georgia freaking Southern, 45-42. And a blowout loss to number 6, Oklahoma, 49-14. They're averaging 30.5 points per game, which is 73rd. And allowing 35.5 points per game, which is 114th. They have a bad defense. And oh yes, they did fire Scott Frost. But the first game after the firing of Scott Frost, not a good sign. The blowout loss to Oklahoma. And that's why Nebraska's number 4. Number 3, Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is really bad. 1-3. Losses include a blowout loss to number 4, Clemson, 41-10. A blowout loss to number 20, Ole Miss, 42-0. And at UCF, 27-10. And yes, their head coach and athletic director are gone. Georgia Tech is averaging 13.8 points per game, which is 127th. How could somebody score less than that? I'll get to that here in a second. And they allow 31.8 points per game, which is 98th. Georgia Tech is a really bad team. That's why they're number 3 on my worst 10 for week 3. Coming in at number 2, Boston College. You should also be familiar with Boston College. They're also 1-3. All I have to say is they lost to Virginia Tech 27-10, and they're 1-3. There you go. That's how bad they are. Averaging 20.8 points per game, 110th in the nation, and allowing 27.5 points per game, which is 85th. Boston College is one of the worst teams in the nation right now. Not just for week 4, but overall. And that brings me to number 1. This team is so bad that they have a page just for themselves. They are historically bad. I'm talking about Colorado. They are 0-4, and now they've entered the record books. They are one of only 6 teams in college football history to start the season by losing 4 games by 25 or more points. That includes Tennessee in 1893, UCLA in 1921, Louisville in 1932, Virginia Tech in 1950, and Indiana in 1957. They lost to TCU by 25, they lost to Air Force by 31, they lost to Minnesota by 42, and their last loss was to UCLA by 28. Colorado is averaging 11.8 points per game, which is 129th, which means there are some offenses, at least a couple, that's worse than that. How's that possible? I don't know. But that's the offense that I was talking about that's worse than Georgia Tech's, and that was pretty bad. They're also allowing 43.2 points per game, which is 126. This team is without a doubt the worst team in the entire nation right now, week 4 and across the board. And they will probably finish wire to wire the worst team in the nation for 2022. That's how bad this Colorado team is. Y'all let me know in the comments section, were there any surprises on this list? Was there anybody that I left out? Or is the order not the way you thought it would be? And how would you have them listed? That's all I got for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.